Hello and welcome back to another episode. I'm very happy to join you, but I'll be honest with you. I've had a bit of a stressful week. It's not been stress like in the typical sense of oh shit, I'm going to wake up stressful, but um, well, last week I played a. I think I've told you on this about on this podcast about how I used to play golf when I was younger. Kind of loved the sport for what it is and what it was back then. Just to go out in the field and on the course rather. I can't say field because I sound like a fucking peasant. But I stopped maybe 10 years back because I couldn't see the ball, and that kind of helps when you're playing golf. But last year I told you that there's this concept called blind golf, which is based on golf with a few exceptions and accommodations, and how a few people are collaborating to bring it Bangalore and India as a result eventually. But last week was a tournament and I decided to play because I've been on the range for almost a year and just been hitting the ball, whacking it, and kind of having this notion that I'm there and I'm ready. And my biggest focus behind that was to get to a place on the course where I know what my swing can do and how much of it is swing error and how much of it is positions and the terrain and the undulations. And I thought I was there. I thought I was making good contact, but everything has a sense of what the reality is. Because the first attempt I made to kind of simulate the course was a few months back when I took it off the driving range mat to the turf, and that just sort of shook me up because I was like, oh shit. Because even a few centimeters, I'm going on about these details because it makes a difference. I know most of you are like, what the fuck is he on about? But I'll tell you why. Because of just a couple of centimeters off the ball on the mat is forgiving, or even an inch off is forgiving because you kind of bounce off. But when you're on the turf, it just digs in, and next thing you have this gash of soil spraying in your face. So I made an effort to kind of get that, and I realized I needed some more inputs and help. So I went to this other person who was helping me figure out how to kind of align my body. As a result, the swing kind of naturally takes its shape and contact is assured. That way it takes out the mat problem, and that way grass is fine. Now, this led me to this, would it say, a false sense of confidence? I thought it wasn't, because as early as the previous Saturday, I was making really good contact. Now, I thought, okay, let me just do one more session on the range before I get to the course. That way I can fine-tune my game, and that way I can nail it, and I can come out winning. Not even winning, but I can come out at least not feeling miserable. And I went to the range and it was just miserable because I was just hitting the ball few inches behind. There was turf flying, and I was like, oh god, just shattered everything that I'd built up for myself. And I was like, okay, you know what, I'm going to go early the next morning. I was supposed to tee off at about 7. I went at 5:30 to the range and I started hitting, and I was a lose, and I was confident. And then I go to the first tee, and the people are like, oh yeah, he's the first blind golfer and all those things, and they were like photographers, and there were people going, and then I hit a 3 wood if you're familiar with golf, and I just hit behind the ball, and it was just tough. And that feeling was like, oh man, I've had feelings like that in different situations, but I think the reason I mentioned that entire build up is because a lot of it was the pressure I put on myself, because I felt my back, and I played the round, ended up going through the motions, sitting on a buggy. We're doing the 18 holes. It was miserable. It was absolutely confidence shattering and all disheartening because of all that practice I put in, and I kind of felt like crap for like a few days after. But then I've just realized now, the reason I'm talking about it is the stress that my body has held on to since that day is slowly now getting out of there, and it's fucking scary what that thing can do, because it locks you up. And I realized that one of the biggest things that happened then was not, of course, the various other things you can attribute it to, which is the terrain. I had no clue where I was walking. And as a result, people start giving you tips. They're like, oh, you have to take a left here, you have to take a right there. They're like pulling you by your arm. Then someone's like, watch out. Then you have an entire new world of things to be aware of than you are on the range. And then the moment you start hitting it badly, you open yourself up to more feedback where people are like, you're starting to close, you're starting to fire, your mom is really a nice person and your sister's hot. Like what exactly? And then these things happen and they build up and then you forget about it. And all the things that I wanted to be confident about so I can reduce the margin of inputs and reduce the elements that people can comment on, all the things just sort of went out of the window, if you want to call it, went down the fucking first hole, and I was just a mess internally. Didn't really show it, which I was happy about. I didn't start weeping and doing all those things which you're supposed to do and get it captured on TikTok or Instagram and get the people who are inspired be like, his first shot was shit but his tears are real. And I didn't fucking do that. And if I'm jerked off in the first hazard, no, I didn't do that either, because I would have missed again, and that would have been really disheartening, because that's one stroke I'm confident about. But it's one of those feelings where I'm rebuilding this evaluation, and how that particular day and the particular approach to that day was not the best, and it wasn't something that I should have put so much pressure on myself to do. And also it's the other narrative, right? Like, where I didn't want to come across as, oh, he's blind, even if he can pick up the golf club, he's an inspiration. I didn't want that fucking narrative either. But it's about managing what I should have done better, which was take it slow. Like how I approached the range, I went slow. I went with a day to day and a session to session. And if I could make contact and better contact by percentage, small percentage, is I would be really happy with myself and not expect day one to be zero, session 1 to be 0, session 2 to be 100, and session 3 to be the best of my game. But that's what I kind of went with when I went to the course to play this tournament. And I got a proper slap in the face, mate, from the fucking game of golf, and it felt absolutely brutal, but I'm much better for it today, and that's why I'm able to talk about it. And the reason I shared that story with you about the game of golf, which most of you probably don't give a shit about, is because it's something that you can remind yourself about anything that you take too seriously and anything you want to sort of accomplish with flying colors, and you don't realize that the reality of it is very, very different from the isolation that encourages isolation, like say in the range, that encourages you to believe. The word I'm having a tough one with encourages you to believe that you are at a position or at a situation in the learning process that you aren't really at, because there is a big difference between certain things when they are viewed without the larger picture. I don't know if that makes any sense, but if it does, I'm glad. And speaking of things that you apply in your life and how you can use those to kind of gauge what's important and what's not, and where you are in your scheme of things as a human being, I've got a lovely guest, and that guest's name is Mr. Nico Stoifberg. He's from Switzerland, of course. And he did something really interesting for himself, which was give up consuming things that he believed he did not need. Of course, besides essentials and besides food, he went off shopping for a year. And not off shopping, like on a shopping spree, but he went off the idea of buying and getting things and packing his wardrobe with stuff and getting stuff online and getting one more of the same, or getting things he needs. And we talk about how that mindset shifted and how the idea of not buying and consuming influenced the way he looked at himself and his surroundings and the way he had lived and how he wanted to live, and how the process was, how it shifted his sense of experiencing the world around him, and what he has become as a result. He's had a very interesting journey, and he's going to share that with, he shared it with me, and I'm going to share it with you. Only here on the SoapyRao Show. As always, thank you for joining me. Till the next episode, goodbye, God bless, take care of yourselves. Cheers, and catch you on the other side with the man who didn't buy anything for a year. And Mr. Nico Stoifberg. Mr. Nico Stoifberg, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you, Sandeep. I'm really, it's really exciting to be invited to do this. Thank you so much.
Now, it's my pleasure having you on. And, before we get to what decisions you took and why you took them, for people who haven't had the pleasure of watching your talk or following your work, maybe can you give them a sense of what you do and also what you did with your time and your life and the decisions you took uh, before you took certain more important decisions?
Before you mean before I decided to stop buying stuff, like when that was
Yeah, so maybe
yeah.
a sense of what you did with your time and with what you did with work and how you sort of led your life before you took that big decision.
Yeah, I would say I led a very normal Swiss life. I'm in Switzerland here,
Hmm.
and which means automatically means a very luxurious life, I would
Mm,
say. Even if you're like a regular guy like me, it's just we're just surrounded by everything you could possibly ever want,
mm,
and that just leads to excesses without you even noticing it. It's just crazy the amount of stuff that we have available. Everything's available 24/7. And like everybody here, I'm just used to that. I grew up like that. I'm used to it. And it took a holiday, a visit to Bali a couple of years ago,
hmm.
where I was shocked by like Bali. Not sure whether you've been to Bali. It's probably not too different from some parts of India, I reckon. And
Surprisingly, you say that. Like, I want to just interrupt you for a moment there because
yeah,
I've had the a chance to visit both Switzerland and Bali, and Switzerland, from what I remember, it's not exactly like, say someone would say it's a country of excesses, like say people typically would refer to America as, right? Like the
yeah,
portions of food that they serve, or even like the
yeah,
outlet malls. Everything doesn't like it seems a lot more excessive in the U.S. when it comes to the size of the cars, or
yeah.
but it's all I've always felt. Switzerland, especially as someone from India, is a country which is a little bit more reserved, whether it's with the way they kind of are seen to live. It doesn't seem as, of course, you have a lot of rich people. I mean, you look at Zurich, you look at the banking hub, you look at the hub for the watches and the luxury brands, of course. But I just feel it seems a lot less extravagant in some sense. Or when I say extravagant, I mean with the way wealth is flaunted. Than some of the examples you hear from the US. And also, when you mentioned Bali, yes, that's another extreme. We do have a lot of pollution and a lot of garbage. Yes, we do in India. But for me, when I visited Semniak, which is the island in Bali, and we went one of those
Yeah,
beaches, it was
yeah,
appalling the number of plastic bags. It wasn't like a beach at all.
absolutely.
So,
And that was exactly my experience. We were
right.
walking along the shoreline there,
Hmm.
and the whole sea, like as far as you could see, was just covered in plastic,
Yeah.
and that really came as a shock to me, especially because I'm not sure whether I'm right there, but I thought much of that stuff probably wasn't thrown out into the sea by the people of Bali, but
Mm.
it probably came from all corners of the world and just washed up there. And I
Yeah.
realized that we are producing that stuff, and it's just it's just total madness. And
Yeah.
that's actually that sight, that experience when I came back to Switzerland
Hmm.
made me want to change something in my personal lifestyle.
Right. So just for
I
context.
was never, I have to probably have to add that I was never like an excessive buyer of stuff. I'm not a shopaholic, not at all.
Yeah.
I wasn't before, and I'm not now, obviously. Yeah, but still, I felt that I had to change
Yeah.
something. For instance, there was this one thing that I shortly before, actually, before that holiday.
Mm.
I bought the coat, and this may be a tiny little example, but I bought the coat, the new coat,
Yeah.
and that coat was available in two colors. And I remember that one of them was called slate gray, and
Hmm.
the other one was called mud. And I couldn't decide which one to buy, so I decided to just buy both. And
Mm.
then I had the same coat twice, and sometimes I wore number one, and the other times number two, and it's just silly because they were basically the same.
That's such an interesting problem to have because in today's day and age, I'm going to give you a little example of India because earlier
Yeah.
India was never seen as a country which was prosperous. People didn't have the luxury of buying things, but now over the past 5-10 years, of course, we do have a lot of poverty, and that is unfortunate. A lot of people don't have a chance to get all their meals in, and yes, that there is a big percentage that is suffering under that issue. But there is been a huge trend of a stronger population middle class that has emerged over the past 10 years, which has been, of course, being trying big companies trying to mine that market, be it the Amazons or the be it the Apples or be it the car companies, and even now luxury brands are coming in, and you have this crazy kind of sense of trying to get these people into consumers, right? Like you have the deals and the sales and the and all those kind of patterns which you were talking about coming here, and with the vengeance that marketing people want to exploit, because the numbers that Switzerland has or Belgium has is times 10 when it comes to India. So even if it's cheaper stuff, you get it times 100, like 100 million, 500 million. These are numbers that they just is a dream come true for companies. But
Yeah.
what's interesting is this entire thing. My wife and I were talking about this. So when I watched your talk, it really sort of caught my attention because I wouldn't call myself a conservative person when it comes to shopping. I do have these weak moments, especially now, I got back to playing golf after many years. So I get an email from this website. It's like, oh, shorts on sale or trousers on sale or shoes on sale. I'm like, I don't need it. Like the bigger part of me is like, oh, you don't need something like that. Let's not pollute the planet. But having said that, I can't always have that image of that plastic-filled beach or the dolphin choking on plastic. It doesn't hit you because you're so distanced from it. So then you're like, yeah, what'll it hurt if I get another pair of trousers? I look good in them. And you make these justifications which let you go onto the website, and next thing you know, it's come in the mail, this 3 pairs of trousers which you got for beautiful steel, and you can't decide whether you want it in slate or in sandstone or in black. So you get all three, and it comes in this big box covered in plastic, and the next thing you feel guilty about why you bought it. So this is, of course, someone like me who's aware of it still makes those decisions, and someone like you who decided to take that step. So now 99% of people who are shopping don't even have that thought. And of course, I don't speak for everyone, but that thought is so unconscious. You're just like, yeah, it's a sale, let me buy it. But okay, I'm sorry, I've just gone on a point for a little long, but I want to ask you, what is the first step from seeing that plastic to coming back home to Switzerland, to looking at your surroundings? And you said you're not a person of excesses, but you still are a part of the grid. And as a result, you end up making choices that aren't always sometimes the most conscious when it comes to environmental impact. But where do you start when it comes to taking the first step with a journey like what you have done?
Well, what actually helped at that point was we were also my girlfriend and I, my girlfriend was with me on Bali back then,
Uh-huh.
and we had to we were moving to a new apartment at the same time, and
Mm-hmm.
whenever you do that, you have to you kind of well, you don't have to, but it's a good moment to throw stuff away,
Yeah, yeah.
and and then you realize, then you're automatically asking all those questions: do I still need this? Do I still want this?
Mm-hmm.
And it was also, funnily enough, I think it was around the same time that Marie Kondo, you'll be familiar with her,
Mm-hmm.
the Japanese author who wrote this book. I think it's called the Art of Tidying or something like that. And
I've
she
heard of
asks
it,
this.
yes.
She has her own show and everything, and she asks that question: does this spark joy? And if the answer is no, she
Yeah.
throws it away. And so that's her method. And yeah, I just realized how little of each thing you really need, and that later on also led me to a new rule which I've been following ever since, which is that whenever I do buy something new, it has to replace something old,
Ah.
something that something that is either broken or just used up. So I don't allow myself to buy something if it doesn't replace something or fills a gap that is just clearly needs to be filled.
You know, the problem with that is I do the same thing. It's just that I give away stuff because I want to buy new stuff, even though the
Oh,
stuff
yes,
doesn't.
you donate it.
Yeah, because it's easy to just say, "Oh, no, I've done a good thing. I've given someone who didn't have a pair of shoes a pair of shoes."
Well,
But
that
those
is
shoes technically didn't have to be given away because they're still very good shoes. But you
that's true,
mixed,
yeah. But
yeah.
obviously that's still much preferable than just hoarding them yourself. So that's still a, you
Oh, I
know,
still do that as well. You know, I mean, in no means do I have a clear slate in this conversation because just before we got on this chat, I ordered a bunch of stuff, which is not really something I'm proud of. But
yeah.
I want to understand what that feeling is for you or was for you when you say, you know, you gave the example of the brown and the mud coat, the mud color and the slate color.
Yeah.
But what did I mean, you also mentioned that you live in Switzerland, you love skiing, and there is a lot of brands that cater to high end fashion when it comes to skiing, right? Be it North Face or Patagonia, with all these things. So what was the approach to equipping yourself for outdoor gear or for the winter or for the festive season? How is I would say you and maybe even your friends in the circle you hang out with, is it how do you look at shopping when it comes to, is it like Thanksgiving sale where you just go Black Friday kind of thing, or is it more conservative? So could you just give me a sense of what that
Yeah.
was?
Yeah, well, it's really funny that you should mention the skiing because right after this interview, when we're done here, I'll go actually to Zermatt, which is up in the mountains,
Mm.
to test skis because I need new skis. I
Ah,
definitely do need new skis now because
right.
my old ones are really, and that's trying to answer your question.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really an avid skier,
Mm-hmm.
and I spend quite a bit of, if I do buy skis, but they tend to be good ones. So
Yeah.
I spend a lot of money on that hobby. It's my favorite thing to do, so I really do spend a lot of money on it. But I
Mm-hmm.
have had those skis that I now can no longer use because you can't really the edges are just gone. You
Right.
can't ski on them anymore. I did use them for I think 6 years now
Mm.
because I ski a lot. That was the time that it took to bring them to to their deathbed, so to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I need new ones. But instead of I know I could afford more than one pair of skis if I wanted to, and
Yeah.
I have lots of friends who have more than one pair. But what I'll do now over this coming weekend is I'll go to Zermatt and I'll test skis there.
Mm.
And I think this is maybe relevant to mention because after that weekend I'll decide which ones to buy. But the testing itself, which is a luxury, I mean, going to Zermatt to test skis, I mean, how many people on earth can even
Yeah.
afford that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm totally aware of that. But what I do there is I'm spending my money on a service, so to say, you know, the sports vendor that lets me test those skis, I'll give my money to them, and I spend my money on a service rather than just on new products. And
Mm.
I think that there's a difference there because I think it makes a lot more sense to increase or grow our economy even or spend money on services rather than goods. That makes a huge difference because there's nothing much to throw away after a weekend of skiing. Yeah,
Yeah.
that I think it's an interesting point you raised there.
No, I try to understand this, right, because my wife runs an e-commerce platform where she promotes designers who are based in India and also outside India. But the primary thing is that they're sustainable and they have ethical practices, because it's almost like an anti-movement to the fast fashion brands like H&M, Zara, Banana Republic, Gap, etc., etc. But I just I was very keen to talk to you because I want to understand this, the power that you feel when you buy something. Because of course the first pair of jeans gives you a lot of pleasure, but the 10th pair doesn't give you as much. So you try to fill that void with everything which you buy, right? The first pair of shoes. I still remember in 1989 or 90, I remember my granddad traveling to the US and then getting me my first pair of Nikes. I know, and that in itself is quite a privilege, but it gave me immense, like, he'd called up and, back then calling international was a big deal itself, right? You call and there's a delay and it's expensive. And he said, I've got you a pair of Nikes, and I couldn't sleep for 2 days. I was like, oh, when is this old man going to come back and get me my Nikes? And it gave me so much pleasure. But now I just go on any website and I pick up, and I know from then, the 90s India to now, I can afford 5 pairs of Nikes without a blink of an eye, right? But it doesn't give you, as you said, if it serves a purpose, like as I said, I've gotten back to golf, and for me, sometimes I have to remind myself, it's not about the club making your game better, or in your case, the skis making your skiing better, but sometimes you do need good equipment. But once you get the good equipment, I feel it's almost like a distraction sometimes, going, my swing's not in place, let me just get a new driver. It's not going to make my game better. But what I find fascinating is whether you're an aware human being or an unaware human being when it comes to consumer habits, it's so easy in today's day and age to be kind of convinced without too much conviction to go ahead and buy something. So what is your approach to that mentality of choosing a service or an experience, and how important is that for someone listening right now to think of it when they're making that decision to buy something?
Well, I think what really matters is that what I did through that year when I really stopped buying stuff for a year. And by the way, back then I had basically two rules. I didn't buy anything anymore, with two exceptions. I didn't allow myself to die.
Yeah.
So I could still buy food, which is helpful if you don't want to die. And the other thing was, I wasn't allowed to start stinking, so I was still buying soap and shampoo and those kinds of things.
Right.
And these were the two rules. But what I also did is I tried to reframe the way that I looked at offers. We're constantly bombarded by offers from all sides.
Yeah.
You walk down the street and you see things left and right constantly, and you're online and you're bombarded with stuff too that you could potentially buy. And I tried treating those offers as basically as a tax on my integrity. So somebody wants to sell me something that I don't really need. So if I can say no to that, that's actually like a yes for me. That's a victory. And once you're in that mind frame, once you're like walking the streets in constant triumph. I say no to this, yes. I say no to that, yes. And you're kind of you're in constant triumph, so to say. And if you can reframe it that way, that makes it much more easy to say no after all. And if you occasionally do buy something, like the skis that I'll probably buy after this weekend, that makes it very exciting, because then it really, you thought about it a lot, you thought about it carefully, and then you decide, okay, I'm now going to make this purchase, and that can be exciting. Whereas if you do it constantly, if you do it to distract yourself from, maybe, I think you talked about this a lot in other podcasts also, about us not being possible to really understand ourselves or spend time with ourselves, so to say, without constantly being distracted by this or that. And I think the psychology behind buying a lot of stuff has a lot to do with that. We can't stand that situation where we're just on our own, faced with our own reality, with our own thoughts, with our own destiny, and have to kind of are forced to ponder on that. And I think we use the act of buying to distract ourselves from that constantly. It's like a small dose of sugar. Like if you constantly eat something sweet just to keep your system running, but it's not healthy in the long term. It's much healthier to have one good meal and then eat nothing for a couple of hours until you do again.
That's very interesting you mentioned that, because the idea of buying and shopping is sort of an extension of the way you live. And we're kind of focusing on that particular aspect of spending money, but I think it can also be extended to other excesses, right? Whether it's alcohol, cigarettes, and even food. People don't talk about food in that sense. They're like, oh, no, no, people who drink are bad people, or people who drink too many glasses of wine or too many beers, they're bad people, or people who smoke, they're bad. But there's this label attached, or there's a stigma attached to certain things, which are, oh, these set of things are bad and these set of things are not bad. But shopping isn't seen as bad, or unless, of course, you spend all your money and you're broke because you want to get those handbags or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But other than that, it's kind of encouraged, like how, and I find that fascinating when you spend money on food or on sweets. And of course, I'm not making a general rule for everyone, but for the most part, there is a set of things on the left side, say, which are good things to spend your money on, and in fact,
Yeah.
you're manipulated into believing that if you have that new pair of shoes, you'll fit in with your classmates or with your colleagues, or if you get the nice Hugo Boss suit, or say, for instance, if you get this kind of food, you get the right things in your fridge, you're seen to buy whole fresh produce or organic meat, or whatever it may be. But if you spend your money on other things like gambling or alcohol or drugs, it's seen as a bad thing. But essentially, it's the same part of the brain that is indulging in this activity. And what you mentioned is fewer is better, because now, for instance, I eat one meal a day. I eat in a 4-hour window, and I enjoy looking forward to that meal. I enjoy that particular meal. And I also am more sensitive to my taste, because just like shopping, I was just unnecessarily eating 3 meals a day, if you want to draw
Yeah.
that parallel, and you become numb to the feeling of what that does to you. And
Yes.
and that's a very interesting thing that you mentioned, because
Yeah.
otherwise you're just, even with shopping, right? I end up doing it when I'm either hungover, or I'm really sort of not able to put my mind at peace with itself, or engaged in an activity. Like, I'm not going to sit here talking to you and start shopping online, right? Because I'm really feeling that I am connecting with you. But when I'm just kind of sitting there going, it's not even bored. It's basically, I'm not at peace with myself. That's when I go to a website. I'm like, ooh, I just add stuff to the basket and empty it out at the end. Sometimes I don't empty it. I end up buying it. But it's such a, I'm a smoker. I was a smoker, and it's the same feeling that cigarette would do for me. I would smoke a lot more when I was distracted, when I was not relaxed with being alone with myself. So it's very interesting you mentioned that.
It's interesting. We were all smokers, I think, people of our age, at least here in Switzerland. I basically don't have any uh, colleagues in my age group that wouldn't have smoked 20 years ago when we all stopped, but most of us. But do you still occasionally smoke, just out of curiosity?
It's strange you mentioned that. Like, I gave up cigarettes last 2021 when I got
Yeah.
COVID in April.
Ah,
and
okay.
and I quit for 18 months, and I was at a wedding about 2 weeks back, and
Yeah.
it was one of those parties, and I don't really go out too often now, because my wife and I have a 6-month-old baby girl,
Oh,
and yeah, so it's one of those things where I'm just,
congratulations.
thank you, thank you. It's as we speak today, it's her 6-month birthday, so so we're just sitting there and being parents, and this wedding was one of those things where I wouldn't say I slipped up, but I made this decision where I'm like, you know what, whether,
Yeah.
and I want to get, maybe it's a nice way to lead into asking you this next question, which I'm going to, when you give up something, especially if it's seen as a bad habit, you're kind of, patted on the back by people going, wow, you quit smoking, very, very good for you. Or you give up alcohol, very good for you. And that gives you this sense of, oh, I overcame. And as you were saying, when you walk past and you're thrown an offer and you say no, you feel good. But then that feeling of good becomes this sense of smugness going, oh, I'm better than others because I gave up smoking.
Yeah.
And I told myself, anything, whether it's good or bad, if it makes you feel that if it gives your ego that sense of boost, I feel nothing deserves, whether it's good or bad, I don't think it should be given so much value. So just to answer your question, I did have a few cigarettes at that wedding, and it felt amazing. It felt like, oh, but at the same time, my mind was fighting, going, oh, you failure. How could you do this? You're back to the old ways. You're a loser. And so I was trying to beat that part, going, why are you your worst critic and also your worst kind of patron, right? Because you kind of constantly bump yourself up, you constantly put
Yeah.
yourself down. So
Yeah.
that's what I want to ask you. Like, what is that feeling that giving up shopping or giving up buying stuff? What did it do to you as a person?
That is a really, really interesting question that you're raising there, because you're basically, yeah. So you said, you're saying we're our best patron, and we're also our own constant critic.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's such an interesting question, because in a way, I'm currently writing, I'm writing a novel, and it's uh, there's uh, quite a bit of Buddhism that comes in there, and just plays a certain role in that, or will play a certain role in that novel. So I'm reading up on anything Buddhism, because I didn't know a thing about it before. And as far as I understand, Buddhists are trying to like detach themselves from those feelings, because they know that, strictly speaking, they don't even the I doesn't even the ego doesn't even exist, if
Yeah.
you take it to the logical conclusion there. And that's an interesting thought, because if there's no ego, you can't really, it's just, everything's just what it is, and you can't really criticize it, or promote anything in yourself anymore. um but what I'm puzzled by, and what I'm really wondering, is what happens if you do that strictly. Then if if you stop criticizing yourself, and if you stop rewarding yourself for things that you think you did well, if there's no sense of pride anymore, but also no sense of shame, then I just wonder what's left. I just wonder how that could even work. I think it certainly doesn't work for me so far. Maybe it will one day, who knows? But it's
Yeah.
just,
No, because
how
it's such
can
a
we even live without that? Aren't we just hardwired to
yeah.
what you mentioned? Criticizing ourselves constantly, indulging in this and that constantly. Isn't that, and being torn between good and bad, devil and angel on our shoulders, and one side says do this, and the other side says no, don't. And isn't that
Yeah.
just the human? Can we even escape that? Is that possible at all? I'm really not sure.
I mean, because when you talk about reading about Buddhist philosophy, or you talk about spiritual texts, and sometimes even in that space, when you read it, I mean, this is just something. I'm in no ways an expert, and that's another statement, right? People also, because I think all this leads to what you did, but also beyond that, because when you kind of, I feel, when you kind of want to read up on a philosophical idea
Yeah.
about existence, or about love, or about acceptance, right? And you kind of escape from the reality of human existence, which is this sense of and let's just even compare it to shopping, right? When you kind of approach spirituality with the same way you approach shopping, you can easily get carried away in the same thing and end up just reading up without feeling any of it, and become numb to the ideas that are presented there. But give yourself this sense of importance, going, I've read up 50 books on yoga and meditation and Buddhism and Sufism, therefore I am more rich as a spiritual soul. But in reality, you haven't felt an ounce of what you've read. Similarly, you possibly could shop the best brand. You have 30
Yeah.
coats from
Yeah.
you have all the biggest brands. You have a Rolex, you have all the watches, but you could be dead when it comes to feeling for those products. And I think there's a point, as a point I'm trying to make, is that it's how you visit all these acts, right? Whether it's enjoying skiing, you could go to the best ski instructors, you can have this best ski gear, you might have the best technique, but you might not feel for any of it. And similarly,
Yeah.
you take that across with food, across with
Yeah.
drinking. Now, what I'm trying to understand, and this is not more so much a question, but I'm just trying to put this in context of what I'm trying to do in my life, and maybe you can talk about your experience with this as well, is that whatever it may be, whether it's sitting in the morning trying to clear my mind and have a few peaceful thoughts for a minute, or a few peaceful beers in the evening, or a cigarette in the afternoon, is where are you coming from when you indulge in that act, whether it's shopping, whether it's eating, whether it's a good or a bad vice. What is your what is your, if you want to call it, perspective, or what is your approach to this? Because I feel that is so much more important, because when you come from a place of when you come from a place of not approaching it, I wouldn't say good or bad, but I'm saying when you approach it with this sense of pleasure and pain, or guilt and fear, or good and bad, then automatically everything has this kind of this effect on you, where there's a weighing scale and it either pulls you in either direction. Did anything I say over the past minute or so make sense? I don't know.
It makes an awful lot of sense, and it's really interesting, because you're basically saying, so the why you do something matters more than what you actually do, right? The intention behind it is just as important, or even more important. And I agree with that. And regarding what I did, change my shopping behavior, change my lifestyle, so to say.
Yeah.
I would never rule out that, if you're asking me now, what was the motivation behind that? What
Yeah.
drove that? And if I think about that, I couldn't rule out that obviously the whole experience, the whole experiment has a positive outcome. It is a sensible thing to do. I think
Yeah.
I did it's the right thing to do. I'm convinced of that. But did I just do it because it'll do good, so to say? Or was there also a part where it made me feel, like you said, can make you feel something like that, can make you feel superior, like, okay, so I'm the one now who's doing the right thing, and hopefully everybody will realize too, and then follow me. So that kind of feeling of superiority, and of moral superiority, maybe. That's interesting, and I wouldn't rule out that this plays a role, whether I was aware of it or not. But it probably does, like this virtue signaling kind of thing, that does play a role.
Yeah.
You
And
could
we
argue
need that,
that,
when you quit smoking, or when you quit shopping
yeah,
for a year, you want to be recognized. It's a human thing that someone goes, wow, Nico, you
yeah,
gave up shopping, or come and talk about it. Or in my case, like, oh, Sandeep, you gave up smoking. It's such, but when it goes unnoticed, it does kind of
you
feel like a little let down, right? You're like, hey, come on, man, I've done so much. Can you at least acknowledge that? So it's a very strange feeling, because and I'm not saying you or me, but I'm saying what. But when you say, after watching your talk, I tried not shopping for the whole of September,
okay,
and I did pretty well. But
okay,
my motivation, I don't know, was like, you know what, you don't need another pair of trousers, or you don't need another t-shirt, and it was fine there. But then I might not need this, and I feel very good about the fact that I haven't bought anything, but I need some golf balls, even though I've only been on the driving range, which provides balls. I still end up buying. So what is very crazy about this whole thing is that this need to be recognized, and a lot of people, including myself, I just said, when the intention is not to be recognized, but it's to appreciate this experience. Yeah, all that is true, but there's somewhere deep inside this need to feel like you have been recognized for doing something. And when it's not recognized, or rather, this need to be recognized for not doing something, like, oh, you didn't have a meltdown, and you were able to hold your own in a conversation. But why is that? I mean, so after this whole experiment of not shopping for 365 days, what is your attitude to work, or to life, or to anything that you do which you enjoy, or sometimes you might not enjoy, but you're obliged to do? So did that 365 days change something
yeah,
in you?
yeah. You automatically start focusing more on experience, rather than material purchases, material things. That happens automatically, because there's not much to enjoy in terms of new stuff that you've bought. So
Yeah.
you'll end up enjoying. I ended up spending, as I've said before, spending quite a bit of money on experiences, you could say. Like if I go skiing now this weekend, this'll be an expensive weekend,
Yeah.
but it'll be an experience, and I'll probably enjoy every minute of it.
Yeah.
So and I think that, yeah, it changes. It makes you realize what psychology has taught us for the longest time now. It is that experiences are more rewarding psychologically than material purchases. And it's much more important, what people do you surround yourself with, what do you do with your time, how do you spend it, are you constantly driven by what others want from you, or are you like leading a more self-determined way of life? These things matter a lot, and I realized I could clearly feel the effect of that during that year. That was definitely the case. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you almost felt liberated, and shopping and not
Yeah.
shopping was your tool for that sense
Yeah.
of feeling, right?
But I
Because
also I also realized that I like to, and you're the same in that way. I'm sure. People like you or I, we do like to sit down occasionally and think about something, and basically do nothing other than just think about something. And there are people who don't like that at all, or maybe just aren't used to it, or outright hate it, and have to just feel compelled to distract themselves from that. They get anxious if there's there's this funny thing. Whenever somebody says, "Oh, on that day or yesterday or the last hour, it was so boring. I was so bored." Whenever I hear that, funnily enough, all my life I've never ever been bored. Like I seriously, and I'm not making this up. It's I don't know the feeling of being bored. I don't know that feeling, because there's always so many things. I mean, as we speak, there's like books and stuff on my table here, and each of these things, if I just look at it, that triggers a chain of thoughts, and I'll be lost in those thoughts for another hour if need be. I don't really need that much stuff around me to have a kind of an interesting, perspective on things. It's that just happens automatically, and it's quite the opposite. I'm very easily stressed by, if I'm surrounded by lots of stuff. I'm easily stressed by that, and I think
yeah,
that's true for a lot of people, but not for all people. And I think
yeah.
there are people who don't whose brain doesn't work that way.
It's very interesting you mentioned that, because, the days I'm sitting listening to an audiobook, I wouldn't call it bored, but I end up daydreaming. I end up having these thoughts of like, oh, it could maybe use the word imagination or fantasize or whatever. But the days I'm on the same device, which is I listen to it on my iPad, but I'm on YouTube, I'm constantly watching, say, a golf video, which is followed by like maybe a video about a car review or maybe a new golf club review. I'm
Yeah.
so stressed unknowingly. Because there's this thing of, oh, you don't have it, you need to get it, or, oh, your clubs aren't as good as the new clubs out there, or whatever it may be. But for a lot of people, as you mentioned, they might not even know it's a distraction, because I feel a lot of the stuff, while it's the same device which has a plus and a negative, like I could never read a book when I was growing up because my sight wasn't good enough to read large amounts of text continuously, right? So I remember when I think 11 or maybe earlier, finished an entire book, and it was the proudest moment. Like it, but did I enjoy it? No, because it took me 3 months to finish that damn book, and it was horrible stories. But now I'm able to read 4 books a week on Audible. Like I'm listening to
Hmm.
audiobooks, and I just
Hmm.
thoroughly enjoy it. And it could be fiction, it could be non-fiction, but
Hmm.
I I just really enjoyed that experience. But for a lot of people, when they're on a phone or a tablet or their computer going through these TikTok reels or these YouTube shorts or these Instagram stories or whatever it may be, it is absolutely stress inducing.
It is. It is. YouTube is the worst when it comes to
Yeah.
that. The worst and the best, because you have to admit, I mean, their algorithm is brilliant. The stuff that they show
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
In my case, it's especially bad in the case of music. I'm listening to a lot of music, and I'm into this and I'm into that, and
Yeah.
then they suggest clips from concerts that I haven't seen yet, and
Mm.
I see that, and I have to say, like, how can I possibly not watch that? It's not,
Yeah.
it's I have to watch this. It's right. It's exactly what I would be looking for if I would be actively looking for stuff. So their algorithm is brilliant and constantly shows me stuff that actually is interesting to me. Even the advertising sometimes
Mm.
gets better and better. We talked about that before. Um, People tend to hate ads, and I do too, like everybody. But at the same time, I have to admit that the ads I'm seeing today are more interesting to me than what I used to see in the 90s, when I was walking down the street, and had
Yeah.
the billboards left and right. So that stuff is interesting. It's just we're just not really. We have to find a way to handle it, because it's not for the longest time, if you see how our brains evolved, our brains are not used to constantly being bombarded by new stuff and exciting new stuff. We used to live in a cave, and if it was a very exciting day, maybe a mammoth walked by occasionally, but that was about
That was our Netflix and chill.
that was our next Netflix show for that day, and we would probably sit around the fire for the next month talking about it.
And a strange thing you
So
mentioned, like for instance, right? Like you love skiing, and I'm sure you're good at it because you spend time outdoors, and it comes sometimes. Some things come naturally to you, and I'm just trying to understand this conversation from like when I go to a golf lesson.
yeah,
And I'm trying to play without seeing the ball. I'm playing through feel, and of course there
yeah,
are a lot of mess ups, but there are some days where it's just something clicks and it feels good.
yeah.
And the physical experience of that golf lesson or hitting 2 hours on the golf range, on the driving range, is a great feeling. And I come back home and I open the YouTube app on my tablet, and I start watching, say for instance, how to hit long drives or how to hit long irons. Now, yes, someone would say that's good. You're extending your knowledge, but I feel it's not always good because it makes you long for a perfect game. It's someone else's idea of what is a good golf swing, or someone else telling you what you should play like, and that creates this disparity of what the reality is and what
So
uh,
interesting.
it's strange because I attempted to learn the guitar last year, and I would
Oh,
watch. I mean, I'm terrible at it. I made peace with the fact that I don't have the discipline to practice. But I still have three guitars sitting around me, and I don't know why I bought them. But I was so obsessed with getting
yeah,
good that I would watch someone like Paul Davids, or I forget his name. I think Paul Davids from Amsterdam. He would play
yeah,
beautifully, but of course he's put in so much work, and I wasn't willing to put in that work, and I'm just
yeah,
sitting there feeling so crap about myself that I would go to a guitar website and say, hey, you know what? Maybe if I buy this rosewood guitar, I'll get better. So
yeah.
do you know where I'm going with this? It's kind of this. It's
I,
the
I,
yeah,
I do exactly see where you're going, I think, and it's so interesting what you're saying, because that drive to constantly, so you're going golfing or I go skiing, and you
yeah,
want to become a better golfer or a better skier,
yeah.
and the big question is why, actually. I mean, as long as you enjoy it, I don't
Mm,
necessarily have to ski any better. I'm already tremendously enjoying it, so I don't I
yeah,
don't I don't need to become a better skier to enjoy it more. But we're hardwired that way, and there's this ambition, this constant ambition, and that reminds me again of what I'm currently reading about Buddhist philosophy. I just wonder, in a way, as you say, as you describe it, it's kind of silly. Why would you even try or why would you feel guilty if you don't practice your guitar playing and will never be a great guitar player? So what?
yeah.
Who says you need to be a great guitar player? There's enough great guitar players out there. There's no need for another one. So where does the ambition come from? And isn't it a silly thing? And in a way it is, but at the same time I wonder if we totally get rid of that, if you manage to get rid of that. And it seems that some Buddhist people have achieved that over the centuries.
Yeah.
If you totally get rid of that, where do you end up with? Will you be just this totally sedated, phlegmatic being that doesn't care about anything, nothing good, nothing bad, everything's just what it is? Is that the state that you'll end up in? And if that's the case, is that a good thing to happen? It's just I'm a million miles away from an answer to all this, but
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing to think about, isn't it?
Yeah, you know when you kind of view this as an outsider, just what we're talking about, um, there is this thing as you aptly pointed out that there is this state finally where there's nothing matters, pain, sorrow. But is that something you want or I want? It's very and yeah, you use shopping or not shopping as your kind of like your tool of curiosity of
Hmm.
what it would do to your human experience.
Yep.
And a lot of people do other things. And if you notice, like say some sort of older religions, and I mean religion not in its kind of commercial sense, but I'm saying the ancient practices. Um, if you look at Lent or you look at
Yep.
Ramzan or Ramadan, as some
Yep.
people call it, it's about giving up maybe food or giving up something you really cherish for a certain amount of time, because clearly that enhances your human experience. Because when you do get back to it, you're not
Hmm.
just mindlessly consuming, whether it's food or content, but while people say religion was the downfall of man, the new religion, which is YouTube and social media, is clearly doing exactly as much harm as they claim
Oh
that the
yeah.
earlier religions did. It doesn't
Oh
make,
yeah.
does, do you see some of that, those similarities coming back again?
Yeah, totally, totally. And I think we're running a huge experiment here, especially with social media. You've talked
Mm.
about this before. I think, the how these algorithms work. It's it certainly is no coincidence. I think there's by now there's ample evidence that all the mental disorders that are on the increase worldwide. I think that's no coincidence. It's that this is not healthy,
Yeah.
But at the same time, I also there are a lot of aspects about social media in particular that I think are great,
Mm.
and there are stuff. There are things, if you're looking at what's happening currently in Iran, as we
Yeah.
speak,
Yeah.
probably wouldn't have been possible 10 year or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And,
No, of
and so
course, and
there's a
that's
lot.
to celebrate. I mean, and I think the social media is definitely responsible for a lot of those good, um, for those events to gain momentum through connectivity and through real time kind of exposure. Yeah, definitely.
Exactly. So the question really is, how do we secure the gains, the upside of that, and without being becoming victims of what's bad about it? And there's a lot about it is problematic, but a lot about it is good too. So it's kind of figuring out ways how to handle these new tools that we're just not used to handling. It takes millions of years or for a brain to adapt to a radically new situation, like speaking on a species level now, not on an
Yeah.
individual level. And so yeah, I'm just wondering whether, yeah, how we can learn to handle all that stuff.
Nico, you gave up buying any non-essential stuff. I mean, not non-essential except food and sanitary products. You gave
Yep.
up stuff for a year. What was? Did you ever feel at some point that you're missing out on life?
Not
And
at
there's a
all.
second part to it: is what was the reactions of people around you? We could maybe take both questions, or we can get to the second one later.
Yeah, well, the answer to the first question is not at all. Really, I didn't. As I've said before, I spent more time, maybe, for instance, instead of buying music, although buying music is not really a problem these days because you don't really buy
Need to
a
buy.
physical
Yeah.
thing anymore. Maybe a bad example, but I used to go to more concerts for instance.
Mm.
and I went out more, socialized more, and all of that is it's just 100% good. There's nothing bad about that.
So did you allow yourself to spend money on going out for dinner, going out to a pub, going out
Oh
to?
yeah,
Okay, so
yeah.
that's allowed. Okay, okay.
That's what I would call experiences or buying services, so to say. If I go to a restaurant, I buy the service of that restaurant,
Ah,
and
okay, okay,
and that's different from buying some new kitchen device that I don't really need. You know,
okay, okay.
so that's yeah. I did allow myself that. And your second question was how did other people react to this?
Or
Um,
maybe I can
yeah.
add another sort of layer to that. Is how were you? How did others react to you, and how did you react to others at in that time?
Well, there were quite there was quite a number of people who said, "Oh, this is cool. I'll try the same."
Yeah.
And some of them did for a whole year, like I did.
Oh,
Others just
nice.
for a month. But there were really there was a number of people who thought, "Okay, I'm going to try this too," and a lot of them successfully so. And there might also have been a couple, because we talked about this before. You're saying, okay, I'll stop buying stuff now, so I'm basically like a better human being than you, because I managed to do this and you don't. That
Mm.
kind of feeling might have come up in some people too. I don't know, that didn't nobody said that to me, but I could imagine that it would.
Yeah.
Um, but generally, I try not to preach. I still try not to avoid that. Not to say, okay, I'm doing this, and actually you would have to too.
Mm.
But just by telling the story, just by telling about people about the experiment, that was usually enough, and it was a good conversation starter. Often, if you mention that, lots of people are interested in these topics, and yeah, so I ended up talking a lot about it to lots of people, and most of them, I think, were kind of interested, and yeah, some of them tried it themselves. So it was a good thing.
Which is really nice to hear, that without you forcing it down. And I think, that extends to beyond what you just did, is because a lot of times today there is this smugness factor, right? People are like,
Yeah,
oh, I do it, so you should. Otherwise, you're not as good as me, or you're a bad human being. With everything, right? Like when you hear people talk about climate change and energy conservation, or when it comes to being a certain kind of food preference, it's almost like, oh, because you don't do it, I'm better than you. And that approach itself just puts people on the back foot. It kind of people are automatically like, you know what, dude, I'm going to do the opposite because I know it's going to piss you off, But
yeah,
your
yeah,
approach
yeah.
seems like it's a
Yeah.
lot more. It's a lot more open. It's a lot more non-judgmental. It comes from a place of, I chose to do this because it gave me a sense of um, pulling back from a typical non-aware way of just buying stuff. But others sort of seem to say, you know what, I'm going to try it as well. And I think to take it beyond what you just did, I think it's a good approach for any human being, right? To just say, I'm going to do it because I enjoy it, or I feel I benefit from it, and not going to preach.
Yeah.
And people usually end up following or adopting that to see how they react to it.
Exactly. They're probably even more likely to adopt it if you don't, if you're not acting as a preacher trying to
Mm.
force them into a behavior that they're not really ready for or don't want to take on. It might be much better to just not quietly do it. I mean, it has to be visible somehow to have an effect on others, obviously.
Mm.
But yeah, if you just modestly say, look, this is what I do. It might work for you, it may not. Um, that's probably the better approach, I guess. Um,
Yeah.
and it's interesting, by the way, you should mention the whole climate discussion, because
Yeah.
there again, um, it's kind of encouraging. I'm not sure whether you've been following the news about the summit in Egypt the
Hmm.
last couple of days,
Yeah.
and it there wasn't too much good news from there, unfortunately. But one thing that stood out, or that I read just yesterday, I think, it seems that a couple of countries are managing now to grow their economy without growing the output of greenhouse gases.
I think I remember
So
vaguely. I don't know much about this, but I think Vanuatu is one of those countries who's made a pledge, and they're really sort of
yeah,
inconsequential when it comes to the so-called global situation because they're really small. They're in the East Pacific, I think, somewhere really, really sort of remote. But I
yeah,
think these kinds of again, I'm not an expert on the summit or on climate change, but I feel what you are doing represents something which I'm not able to grasp with as a concept, but it represents a time which is coming where it's a lot more. And I spoke to someone yesterday on the podcast, and he had a very nice. He's a psychologist, behavioral psychologist, and he said this, which is such a. It's just stayed with me. He says basically we need to give people principles to empower themselves than concepts to categorize them by. And I feel what you have
hmm,
done and what a small country
oh,
like Vanuatu is doing is
yeah,
exactly that, saying, you know what, we're not going to play to the victim card. We're not going to succumb
yeah,
to this category that you put me into, whether it's consumer, whether it's small country dependent on fossil fuels. But we are going to take these small little initiatives that are going to help us be going to help us sustain ourselves as an
yeah,
individual or as a small country and
yeah.
not fall prey to these larger things which are being diagnosed by powerful people or powerful countries or powerful systems.
Yeah, 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 very much so. That's exactly right. But I did think that it's encouraging, that like so as you say, some individuals, some countries even can act as role models, so to say, without forcing anybody to do this or that, but just leading
Mm.
by example, basically. And it seems possible that this is happening now with yeah, in that report I read yesterday, there's a number of countries around the globe, some of them in Europe, but also in all corners of the world, that really where the economy is growing, but resource consumption isn't,
Mm.
and so that decoupling is possible. It is a possible thing. It's not this is not fiction. This can happen if you go about it the right way, and I think that's very encouraging in the end. I If I may, I wanted to ask you about one thing because you mentioned your 6-month-old daughter a
Mm-hmm.
minute ago, and this is a touchy subject because
Mm-hmm.
I also we have one daughter. She's 5 now,
Oh, lovely.
um,
Okay.
and we talked about products, we talked about consuming products, physical goods. One thing, obviously, that has a huge effect on the planet, or just when it comes to sustainability, is how much children we have, and this is
Yeah.
a super touchy subject, and
Yeah.
I have no idea whether that discussion is happening in India, and if yes, what opinions are there, and it's super interesting, and I was wondering what your thoughts on that were, because whenever you mention that here, it's really, you have to be really careful with this,
You know,
because
it's
it,
so easy to upset everyone
yeah,
if they come from a place of wanting to be offended or upset, then they will be whether you're talking about
yeah,
climate, God, children, whatever, right? So I was absolutely thinking about the impact because when you have a child, you aren't just having a child. The child is going to grow up and have certain behaviors and influence other people's behaviors, and is also going to grow up to be in an environment which you have no control over in the future.
yeah,
So it's a responsibility more than just a worry, right? Because one is, are you having another child who's going to be a burden on the planet and society, or
yeah,
are you going to have a child who you are responsible for, and to responsible for ensuring that that child's going to have a safe future to live and thrive in, right? So there are a bunch of questions there, but the thing in India is that it's politicized, right? People always say it's the poor people who are illiterate, they're going to have kids, but it's some people would say it's a certain religion, like Muslims have too many kids, or some people say Christians, some
yeah,
people say Hindus. It's very, and it's the same place where you came from when, or we spoke about, is when you're pointing fingers, it's so easy to point it away from yourself and to say it's someone else's problem. And I know people who are educated, so-called really sort of privileged from a upper middle class or upper
yeah,
class of society, who are like, oh no, it's the poor people, and they end up getting IVF and having 4 kids, and it's it's the same thing. None of these things are going to get solved if you are coming from a place of looking at someone else as the problem or someone as the cause for the problem. If you look at yourself and say, you know what, I'm going to have a child because I think that's something I or my family or my partner or my wife and I want, you are going to do as much as you can to give that child and also the process thought before you have or take a decision like that. But if it becomes a thing of proving a point or blaming someone else, then we're going to have more and more people manipulating that situation and then using that situation to sort of further their agenda, and it's just going to get worse and worse, which is what's happening in India right now, because there's absolutely no conversation around population control in our country right now.
Really? Yeah.
No, yeah.
Okay,
As far as I know.
I didn't know. I didn't know that. Yeah, well, you would know. Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, as far as I know, I don't think so. I don't think.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, there are a few people doing great work, but the moment it becomes policy or becomes on a governance scale, then it starts being, oh, you're doing this because you're trying to, you're trying to reduce a certain group of people, or it becomes very sort of, it becomes a fighting sort of conversation where it becomes religious, it becomes classist, it becomes all these things where one group tries to just sort of thing, and at the end of the day, at the end of that conversation, nothing is actually solved. But there are few people who are aware of the problem, and I don't want to come across as someone ignorant in this, because this is from my personal experience. I'm not a policy maker, but I think this is a thing which I don't think any government can enforce. But I feel what we've spoken about, where it's an individual's decision, if that increases and that empowerment happens, I feel we will see change only in that context, not from the outside in, but from the inside out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's probably exactly. Yeah, I think you're right there. It has to happen like that. You can't really force it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because then it's going to be used by others to kind of fan the flame, so to speak.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly so. And there are examples if you look just across the border from India to China.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to work very well either. If you
Yeah.
just yeah, the one
I
child
mean, it
policy
ends
you
up
had.
I think those kind of measures end up seeing the darker side of humanity, where you kind of things like eugenics, things like
Oh yeah,
male preference for the male child, and those kind of horrific
exactly.
things, which are, of course, we've seen history shown us not the best
No, they're not.
solution.
They're not the best recipe for a peaceful world. Yeah, that's true. That is
Yeah.
true. Very true.
Nico, it's been a fantastically enlightening conversation, and it's been
Thank
a
you. It
pleasure
was.
getting to know you. But I want to highlight one thing which I really, really find endearing and fun, and something that resonates with me. When I read your About Me section on the website, it said, I'm going to quote you on this, but it said, love to read during the day, to write during the night, ski and drink. And I think that's something I love doing as well. I think you specify that's red wine. For me, it's beer. And you ski, I play golf. And I think it really struck a chord with me.
I do like beer too. Yeah,
Oh, fantastic. So we
Yeah.
can hang out. I'll bring my golf clubs to the ski slope, and you can bring your skis to the golf course.
Yeah, yeah. Are you traveling a lot these days? Probably not so.
Not
Not.
yet. Not yet.
Yeah.
I'm mainly
Yeah.
staying in Bangalore, but I hope to travel in the next year or two, because a few people and I are trying to introduce this concept called blind golf to India, where it's people with varying levels of vision or
Oh,
visual
cool.
impairment
Yeah.
can play. So if that happens and we do sort of sync the Indian blind golf chapter with the international blind golf chapter, then we might travel. And if that's the case, then I'll definitely, go play golf, and not to win or to compete, but just to play golf around the world and take my wife
Yeah.
and take my little girl with us. So hopefully one of those stops is in Switzerland in the near future.
Yeah, that would be very cool. It would be so
Yeah.
nice to meet you. Yeah.
No,
And I
and
also,
definitely I might make a trip, because as I said, I have family there.
yeah.
And if I do make that trip, I will reach out to you. And
Oh yes, yeah, please do, please do. And I'll do the same. When India is one of the countries that I desperately want to visit and never got to it.
well, you
But I
have
will
a
eventually.
friend, and you have someone to show you around over here.
Yeah.
It'll
So
be
great. Yeah, it was a real pleasure. Thank you so much, Sandeep. It
Yeah.
was
Thank you, Nico. It's been a
really
pleasure
cool.
talking to you, and good luck with all your future projects and work, and
Same to
have
you.
fun.
Same to you.
Thank you.
Take care.
You too.